It is my pleasure to introduce to you the JCP Pandemic Planning Manual team. This team is a group of hardworking, conscientious, and committed people who spent the last 5 months conducting research and interviews to investigate the pressing needs and best practices of community-based nonprofits across Ontario in the time of COVID-19. In fall 2020, Literacy Link advertised 6 research writer positions on the Canada Job Bank. We sought a core of committed people who would research, develop, and craft a pandemic planning manual that community-based nonprofits can use to navigate the...
Oh, Jeremy, you're on mute.
Saw that, now we're good. We sought team members who could recognize the importance of a project like this. This team proved to be what we were looking for. We selected them from nearly 1,000 applicants. The team we assembled consisted of 6 members, 2 of whom have moved on to other employment. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the contributions of Lauren Haynes-Long and Ryan Willis, who played a vital role in the research and interview process, as well as the manual drafting process. Lauren and Ryan were with our team until March. The 4 team members with us today, Lynn Glenn Hay, Melanie Connell, Reem Asaf, and Heather Stevenson, deserve special thanks for their ability to bring this webinar to completion and for crafting an outstanding pandemic planning manual. These 4 hardworking people are doing the work of a 6-member team. I want to thank everyone present for attending our webinar. I am delighted to present the JCP Pandemic Planning Manual team to you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope you are all doing well. My name is Reem. I am one of the 4 pandemic manual writers with Literacy Link South Central, and I also want to thank you for graciously accepting our invitation to attend this webinar, and also thank you for showing interest in Literacy Link South Central's creation and publishing of the Pandemic Planning Manual. Making this happen was, as Jeremy mentioned, through hard work on the part of all of us, and we are eager to give you a glimpse of what we have worked so dedicatedly on for the past 5 months. I would like to take this moment just to note that the views expressed in this webinar are the views of Literacy Link South Central and do not necessarily reflect those of the province. The Government of Ontario is in no way bound by any recommendations contained in this webinar or the Pandemic Planning Manual. I would also like to say that Literacy Link South Central gratefully acknowledges the funding provided by the Government of Ontario under the Ministry of Labour, Training and Skills Development. Now, this webinar will kick off with an introduction to Literacy Link South Central and the team of pandemic manual writers, followed by a run-through of the methods utilized throughout this project. We will then take you through an overview of each section inside the pandemic planning manual and finish off with a question period. I would also like to inform you that the question period is structured in a way which will encourage you to type out any questions you may have at any point in time in the chat, so you don't have to hold or remember your question until the end, because we plan on addressing all the questions in the end question period, whether they were sent in the chat during the presentation or if they came to mind after the presentation. Now, a bit about Literacy Link. Literacy Link South Central is a nonprofit literacy support network based in London, Ontario, which helps match people who are looking to gain life and career skills or increase their literacy levels and help match them to a literacy services center which best suits their needs. Literacy Link South Central also prides itself in conducting essential research projects and workshops, and in offering support to learners through specialized resources designed by their professional staff. And now, to introduce all who will be speaking throughout this webinar, we have with us, as you know, Jeremy, our supervisor, and the team, Heather, Lynn, Melanie, and I. We will be covering a summary of the content we think is important for you to know about each section in the pandemic manual, as well as a process and inspirations for our research and writing. And our hope is that you will leave this webinar feeling excited to check out a new informative handbook to add to your virtual shelf. I will now give the floor to Heather on her talk about the methodology behind our research and writing process.
Thank you, Reem. In preparation for writing this manual, the team conducted research from an extensive group of primary and secondary sources. In the first stage of research, we conducted a general investigation of existing pandemic response plans, especially plans developed in the wake of COVID-19. We were interested in understanding how organizations responded quickly to a crisis that was still unfolding. We wanted to know how organizations shifted to remote or online work how they communicated with staff and clients, and how organizations reopened, if at all. We looked at best practices and policy guides and municipal, provincial, and federal guidelines. We directed research towards specific topics that Literacy Link South Central identified as key to a pandemic response manual. In the second stage of research, we conducted 34 interviews with nonprofit organizations from both within and outside the literacy and basic skills field. Our interviews focused on the topics which now form the core sections of the manual. These interviews were key to developing our recommendations, and they provided firsthand accounts of ongoing crisis response and of the resiliencies of nonprofit organizations. The organizations that participated in our interviews were drawn from across the province of Ontario, and we are so grateful that so many organizations contributed to this project. The geographical breadth and informational depth of the interviews established a strong foundation for the manual. Our interviews were conducted via Zoom and over the telephone, using a series of questions the team compiled based on the secondary research. After conducting the interviews, the team developed a feedback survey that was emailed to all interviewees. This survey was provided to allow all the participating organizations the opportunity to ensure the accuracy of the information included in the manual. As we received feedback, we incorporated responses and suggestions into our draft. The final version of the manual represents months of careful research, writing, and design from our dedicated team with the support of Literacy Link South Central. And now we'll move to the first section, policy creation and board oversight. Development of new policies or adaptation of existing policies continues to be a key component of pandemic response in the workplace. Our suggestions in this section are meant to provide general guidance, as each organization will have its own protocol for how to develop new policy and what appropriate policy looks like. Even the most organized offices were left scrambling to adapt their operations to suit lockdowns and social distancing. We recognize that preemptive response to a crisis is not always an option. However, if possible, at a time when an organization is not in crisis, we recommend reviewing operations as a whole and reaffirming such things as whether all employees are familiar with the expectations associated with their position, operational policies, and where to access key information. For example, are there key documents for running the office or for service delivery? And are these documents accessible in the event of office closure? One of the organizations we interviewed indicated that because their files contain medical information, these files cannot be housed on United States-owned cloud services. An organization in this position would need to investigate the appropriate storage method for such documents that would also allow for remote access in the event of a lockdown or hybrid working situation. Policy areas that many organizations reconsidered during the pandemic include policies around sick leave, working from home, social media, and cybersecurity, as well as policies related to other areas covered by this manual, like personal protective equipment. It is also important to be aware that an emergency caused by airborne illness will come with challenges such as the need for face masks or other protective equipment. As we have seen, mask regulations can be contentious for some individuals or communities. One of the organizations interviewed indicated that they sought out retraining around human rights and how to accommodate issues around mask policies. As well, with the development of new vaccines and potentially increased encouragement for existing vaccines, such as a flu shot, organizations will likely need to consider how to address the vaccine status of both employees and workplace visitors. The appendix of our manual includes a sample vaccination policy for your office. With regards to the board of directors, their most crucial role in an emergency is continuity in the mission of the organization. In general, the board is responsible for the overall governance of the organization, including policy decisions and the approval of the budget. In our interviews, some organizations indicated that they have struggled with their boards. Some boards communicated less during the crisis or didn't seem to understand what an organization needed to do in terms of finances or service delivery to continue the vital work in the community. As with the rest of the organization, the board should review their roles and responsibilities as dictated by organization bylaws and policies. As well, the board should familiarize itself with current operations, projects, and goals of the organization so that all members can contribute effectively to decision-making processes. Based on our interviews, two main concerns were financial continuity throughout the crisis and consistent communication between the board and an organization's executives. So, for example, a board might consider moving payments to an automatic withdrawal or deposit system. They might also consider adopting something like a best practices guideline for remote meetings. Crucially, if the bylaws for the board of directors do not currently allow for remote meetings, the board may want to develop a policy to allow for electronic or telephone meetings. One positive outcome some organizations recognized is that remote meetings are often more efficient. Although they are not as social as in-person meetings, remote meetings have the benefit of reducing travel time and costs for participants and keeping meetings to a tighter schedule. And now Lynn will discuss personal protective equipment.
Thank you, Heather. Before 2020, most of us likely never thought about personal protective equipment or realized that PPE was its acronym. That is, unless you or a loved one relied on those devices to stay safe from accidental injury or hazards on the job, like working from heights, slugging it out on a construction site, or in hot and possibly explosive situations. And if you're like me, you may have also learned that the gear that surgeons and nurses wear, as seen in some of our favorite dramas, is meant to not only depict a sterile environment for the patient, but that it's designed to protect those who wear the equipment from visible and microscopic dangers. No thanks to the coronavirus, PPE has now become common in the lives of everyday people. It's currently mandatory in Ontario that every citizen who is not exempt must wear at least a version of PPE when out in public, specifically a face covering. When we wear the device, we help to protect others from us, a potential source, since we can be a carrier even when we're not sick or never develop any symptoms. It's been determined that the disease can be transmitted from an infected person to another by way of their respiratory droplets, which are dispelled when we speak, sneeze, or cough. This makes it easy for the virus to find its way into our eyes, nose, or mouth when we're in close contact with others. The droplets can also land on surfaces that can be transferred to our hands. Both of these reasons are why physical distancing and frequent hand washing are important. As you're aware, the regulations for social gatherings in Ontario and within our municipalities change frequently, as do the fluctuations of COVID-19 cases. So while today we're encouraged to not socialize outside of our household, our social bubble can be expected to grow once again. PPE, however, may still be with us for longer than we'd like. There are 5 items that are commonly being used for the protection against COVID. I'll briefly go through each of them in the order that they're listed in our manual. The first are medical gowns, specifically isolation gowns, which are either disposable or reusable. They're worn in healthcare settings, including dental clinics, when workers provide care for a patient. The gowns help to protect their clothing underneath from any viral droplets and the possibility of transferring the virus onto other surfaces. If the gown is not removed properly after coming in contact with someone who has the disease, it may result in spreading the contaminant. Government authorities are not recommending that these be worn as protection in the public arena. Another PPE are disposable medical gloves. These protect both the patient and the wearer and can help to slow the spread of the disease. But gloves provide another surface for the virus to live on. For this reason, along with the concern that wearing gloves may give people a false sense of security, health officials recommend against wearing this item while performing activities outside of our home, like grocery shopping. This is especially true if people don't refrain from touching their face or personal items, since they can contaminate themselves or other commonly touched items. If it's necessary that you wear gloves, please be mindful of what you touch, and with any other PPE, ensure that you receive training on correct donning and doffing procedures. Respirators for medical use are commonly known as N95 masks and are the best at providing protection for the person who wears it. They are designed to block 95% of hazardous airborne particles and aerosols from being inhaled and are produced in different styles. The effectiveness of this device explains why they were in great demand after the pandemic was first declared by the World Health Organization over a year ago, on March 11, 2020. Supply shortages were a common complaint and a real concern for healthcare workers. The masks are disposable and intended to be worn only once after contact with a viral patient. At the height of the pandemic, the supply couldn't keep up with the demand. Therefore, the public were being asked not to use these masks so supplies could be preserved for our healthcare workers and first responders. Since then, more respirators are being manufactured and methods to decontaminate are evolving, yet authorities are still asking the general public to use another type of face covering. Additionally, we've been told that respirators with an exhalation valve dispel respiratory droplets from whomever is wearing the mask. Apparently, these are more comfortable, but if worn by someone who is infected, they can hasten the spread of the virus to those around them. Medical grade masks or procedural or surgical masks are the next best thing to N95s, but instead of providing protection to the person who wears the mask, these are considered a source control, which means they protect those around them from the source, which is the person wearing the mask. They provide better bacteria filtration and airflow than masks made from woven cloth and must pass 5 tests for proper classification. These masks, as well as respirators, are made from layers of polypropylene, a synthetic fabric developed from crude oil. Unfortunately, this non-woven material is neither environmentally friendly nor sustainable. Just like the N95 masks, authorities are asking the general public to help preserve supplies and to use a non-medical type face covering. For those who rely on medical masks for their occupation or for other reasons, you'll want to know that there are many in the marketplace that look alike, yet not all meet the same standards. These non-medical masks are designed with the same typical folds and pleats as the ones I just mentioned. They come in a variety of colors and also have a metal strip at the center that will bend to fit around the bridge of the nose. They fasten to the face with elastic ear loops and may have ties that wrap around the head, similar to procedural or surgical masks. These masks, however, are not licensed or graded according to the classes established by the Canadian government. Now, we're going to present a video that demonstrates the disparities between the two types of masks. I hope you found that interesting. So now we'll have a repeat. So now a bit more about medical masks, non-medical masks. Currently in Ontario, if we cover our nose and mouth whenever we are inside a public place, then we are fulfilling our mandatory legal obligation to protect those around us, and from whatever virus we may be carrying. The most effective non-medical mask is well fitted to cover the nose, mouth, and chin without gaps, and it's made from multiple layers of tightly woven fabric. Like cotton or linen, an inside pocket can be created to insert a filter-type material for added protection. Spun bond polypropylene is the most popular textile to use as a filter, but folded paper towels or tissues can also work. If the mask is designed with a thin wire at the bridge of the nose, it will result in a tighter seal to keep droplets from escaping and provides the added benefit of preventing glasses from fogging up. And unlike any of these methods depicted in the poster, when worn correctly and if designed well, non-medical grade masks can be an effective choice to help reduce the spread. Another PPE is eye protection. This item is intended to protect the person who wears it. Acceptable devices include safety glasses with side shield, goggles, a full face shield, or a mask with an attached visor. However, they are not considered an effective form of protection if worn without a mask. Healthcare workers and other professionals like teachers and childcare providers must wear eye protection along with a mask, and a distance of 2 meters between others cannot be consistently maintained. When practical, plexiglass or other transparent dividers can be used in place of eye protection. Although these dividers are not considered a PPE, we see them being used by taxi drivers, receptionists, and many others, because as you know, it's not always possible to be separated by 2 arms lengths. So just for fun, here's some examples of homemade PPE that may be more dangerous than effective, which by the way, we do not recommend. Transportation. Naturally, traveling by public transportation during a pandemic is a cause for concern. Large gatherings of people at rush hour was not unusual in the pre-pandemic days. For countless travelers, their health and safety is now a bigger concern than finding a seat on the bus. After the initial stay-at-home order was lifted, we heard that many folks were hesitant to leave their homes, especially for non-essential trips if it meant that they were required to take public transportation. When it became feasible, learners were encouraged to re-engage in any way possible. And since walking, biking, or driving is not an option for everyone, we were given a few suggestions to pass along. First, provide reminders that safeguards have been put in place for those who use public transportation. This will involve an explanation on how the operators of public transit, rideshares, and taxis want to keep their drivers and travelers safe too, and will be following health and safety guidelines. It's also empowering to know that we still have some control over the situation. When we plan ahead and follow the recommendations, we can be sure that we have taken all of the necessary precautions to stay safe. Good planning consists of scheduling appointments and taking care of errands during non-peak hours. Of course, one needs to always wear a mask in public spaces, and although not touching shared surfaces is ideal, it's not always avoidable. We suggest, therefore, packing hand wipes or sanitizer before leaving home. Using a prepayment system or another contactless method to settle fares will eliminate the need to touch a public device and perhaps lessen one's fear of touching the virus. And whenever possible, physical distancing needs to be maintained. Then there are the reminders to not touch our face or the outside of our mask, don't leave home if you have any symptoms, and wash hands thoroughly or use hand sanitizer before and after a journey. For those who are just too uncomfortable to travel by way of public transportation, there are other ways to continue a working relationship. These include learning online, exchanging emails, phone calls, and text messaging, arranging to have materials left or picked up at the curbside, and using good old Canada Post with prepaid self-addressed envelopes. That's the end of my presentation. Now here's Reem to introduce you to her section of the manual. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. To introduce the mental health section of our pandemic manual, as you all know, while staff of literacy and basic skills and other service nonprofits recognize the importance of mental health, the pandemic still placed a heavy toll on the service providers and clients or learners in literacy and basic skills nonprofits, as well as other service nonprofits, because everyone has been tirelessly working to keep the organization afloat, with challenges such as reduced staffing and funding and an increased demand for services and responsibilities thrown into the playing field this past year. The overwhelming rise in workload has led to issues like workplace burnout, fatigue, and exhaustion, as well as heightened relentless anxieties and fear from the uncertainties and risks that the COVID-19 virus has brought on. And with learners and clients who are recipients of literacy and basic skills and other nonprofit services, these concerns are very real in their personal lives as well. On top of this, learners have been worrying about how to get by with their low incomes, their safety and level of risk for COVID-19, and even feelings of isolation and not being able to connect with the community like they could before when they access supports. A lot of low literacy learners come from backgrounds where their life situation sets them up for a high susceptibility to mental health issues. And so staff often find themselves taking on cases of learners or clients who are particularly vulnerable to this increased risk of mental health issues to begin with. And the pandemic crisis only exacerbates these vulnerabilities. Couple this with the decreased capacity and the ability for many nonprofits to offer that full range of support to these learners, and you have a growing mental health crisis. Our outreach towards the many agencies we've spoken to allowed us to know a few common themes in how the general trend has moved for mental health concerns and consequential need for support. as well as in staff efforts to keep each other and their learners' mental well-being in check. The responses we gathered from these interviews confirmed our judgments that mental health aid has been increasing in demand, something which we think is representative of the struggles many other nonprofits across Canada in the services sector are facing. Those we spoke to told us about a wide range of methods they implemented to be proactive towards creating a work environment conducive to good psychological health. A lot of small nonprofits are set up with employment assistance programs. Staff encourage openness about struggles and needing time off or reduced workload. And they're doing routine check-ins and connecting with one another and their learners. Some have new projects and initiatives running, and some have in-house psychological services offered. On the flip side, where we noticed gaps typically found were in those smaller nonprofits who had less staff to work with and couldn't be as accommodating as they wanted to be, or those who didn't have employment assistance programs as part of their benefits in order to access those fair-priced, comprehensive psychological services. In the pandemic planning manual, we aim to fulfill the mental health section by addressing commonly mentioned concerns to the best of our ability, namely through highlighting insightful facts and recommendations reflecting the key takeaways and main themes of what was talked about during the interview phase. We also provide an extensive list of educational and service-based resources and attach descriptions alongside each one to explain their purpose, as many nonprofit staff may just not have been aware of them or may not have had enough time to thoroughly research them. We aim to include as many quality resources as we could in one easily accessible spot at the disposal of all who wish to use this manual. And to give you a brief outline of what you can expect to find in this section, firstly, there are a number of links we opted to recommend just for general access by agencies and their learners, after, of course, we thoroughly evaluated and confirmed the reliability and their degree of helpfulness for a wide range of mental health concerns. And next, of notable mention is our inclusion of an initiative which was also the recent work of Literacy Link South Central's, called the Reach Out for Mental Health campaign, which is in and of itself an invaluable directory to online resources and a source of awareness on the importance for mental health. We also put in a good amount of links which promote services with an emphasis on all-inclusive mental health treatment for populations who may have been struggling to a greater degree this past year, such as those living in northern and rural communities of Ontario. To end off my talk on the mental health section, I just want to put it out there that we stand by our confidence that offering a manual section wherein awareness, education, and resources for mental health would be of utmost benefit to service-oriented nonprofits, because of the general consensus that mental health support has not been prioritized as much as it should have been. And moving on to our next section in the pandemic planning manual, we thought it was important to write about things related to the basic needs of learners. And as you're all aware, many of the learners and clients who access community services have had increasingly complex service needs. A disproportionate number of these people are already affected by multiple personal barriers, which have been made worse as a result of the pandemic, causing this cycle of increasing poverty levels and systemic inequities. Threats to food security and housing stability, loss of income, increased domestic violence in the household, insufficient access to tech and stable internet for learners to utilize tools and services from their homes. These are all pressing concerns of many marginalized communities, or even just those who have been less fortunate in their brush against the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic. It is clear that the demand for aid is not limited to just the area where service delivery is concerned, but for other bare necessities critical to human survival. And the lessened capacity for many organizations' abilities to tend to these issues can be put down to several reasons. The main one is the fatigue from overly complex caseloads and increased pressure on organizations that have already been stretched thin. Many of the organizations serving people who are most impacted by the pandemic, for example, those living in poverty or Indigenous populations, seniors, for example, are those same organizations which are likely to have limited or no reserves to help cushion them. And also, agencies are having to undergo major shifts to their operations to adapt to changes to the program funding budgets, suffering from these daunting workforce challenges and financial uncertainties along the way. From what we have heard through the conversations we've engaged in, organizations have been doing their part to pivot to meet the demand of basic needs, but sometimes strains the resources because they begin to drift away from their mandate. However, many agencies we've heard from told us they were actually reallocating their program funds from areas no longer in need of funding in order to purchase things for client use and help with fulfilling basic needs of clients. And whether it was partnering up with other boards to acquire funding, gathering donations, reaching out to and following up with clients through phone calls and visits, agencies seemed to be striving to do what they could. However, there were some obstacles that made this a bit harder, as many social assistance programs were not offering a wide enough variety of supports to alleviate the burdens clients were facing. And also, outreach efforts in order to find or refer out struggling members to community services have been challenging because many community support networks that agencies relied on were at reduced functioning. And another thing is that outreach efforts were also challenging for small nonprofits when they were trying to get a hold of more donations because of their smaller size circle of contributors that made it difficult for them to attract attention to themselves. And in regards to our manual, we aim to fulfill the basic needs section by making readers aware of the common challenges that a crisis like a pandemic can bring onto the lives of many people. It also provides insight on what things can be done if you are a part of a small agency and want to learn more about how to help populations facing vulnerabilities. This section concludes with a few resources we felt were necessary to include, as they can be a tool to help you easily and quickly navigate social assistance plans for your clients or your learners. And now on to Heather once again, as she covers technology and stable internet.
Thank you, Reem. This section of the manual considers some of the challenges of both working from home and remote service delivery. As well, we offer information on the technological requirements for remote work or learning. For literacy and basic skills agencies, it can be complicated to stay connected with learners who once accessed in-person services. This gap in accessibility, commonly called the digital divide, is the result of lack of access to technology and to stable internet. The digital divide can also affect employees. Some employees may have basic computer equipment at home, but may not have up-to-date technology that supports newer learning or meeting platforms. Clients and employees alike may live in regions with little to no high-speed internet coverage. We recognize that some obstacles created by the pandemic are ongoing and will require upgrades to infrastructure beyond the control of any individual or organization. For other concerns, we offer information on the technology and software commonly needed to establish a successful remote workspace. We also offer suggestions for learners with low-level digital literacy skills. Newer smartphones often meet the operation requirements for remote work. Desktop and laptop computers may be more complicated. We break down hardware and software needs for things like participating in video conferencing. We also offer some suggestions for improving home internet connections, such as only operating one device at a time on a Wi-Fi connection if possible, or using an Ethernet cable to connect directly to a router. Moving quickly to new technology was a daunting task for some organizations and their clients. However, many organizations were able to adapt in ways they had not expected. While some may resist the initial move to new technology, offering a supportive environment and professional development opportunities proved helpful for many. For learners or clients, keeping a note on file about whether the learner has a support person to assist with new technology can ease the transition to accessing services remotely. And now Melanie will discuss fundraising.
Thank you, Heather. Originally, we hadn't planned on including a fundraising section in the manual. However, while conducting our interviews, we learned that most of the organizations we were speaking with had stopped fundraising since the onset of the pandemic, as previously fundraising had revolved around in-person community gatherings. Many were relying on COVID-19 related grants instead, but weren't sure how long that would remain sustainable. It became clear that virtual fundraising guidance could be a useful addition to the manual. During our interviews, nonprofit leaders attributed any fundraising success that they had during the beginning of the pandemic to sharing their needs and donation links over social media and email newsletters. Even if you don't feel like it's the right time to fundraise, improving your social media presence and keeping your supporters updated can increase awareness and the likelihood of future donations. Similarly, improving your website can be beneficial for your organization. This subsection of the manual provides some research-informed tips for optimizing your website and donation process. For example, research has shown that including a donation button at the top of every page on your website can increase donations. People are less likely to donate if they cannot figure out how to do so very easily. Keep in mind that the average person's attention span is around 8 seconds. For this reason, it is also best to limit distractions on your website and required fields to fill out on donation forms. Make sure that your website and donation process are both mobile friendly, as donations are increasingly happening over mobile devices. Google has a mobile friendly test that you can use for free. You might also try browsing through your website and completing a donation on your own device to see if any changes should be made. There are additional tips like these available in the manual. Next, we moved on to list some popular fundraising and donation platforms that are available online to Canadian charities and the features that each platform offers. It's important to note here that the features we've listed are currently up to date, but they could change in the future. As you can see, the platforms we've recommended are Canada Helps, GoFundMe, PayPal Giving Fund, and Facebook's charitable giving tools. Each platform will automatically provide tax receipts to your donors. PayPal Giving Fund and Facebook's charitable giving tools are valuable as they do not take any percentage of donations. Canada Helps, which I know a lot of you use already, has some great features available, not only for collecting donations, but also for customizable donation forms that can be added directly to your website, peer-to-peer fundraising pages, event ticketing and management, donor management and reporting, and more. There are links provided in the manual to videos that can guide you through using these features. Lastly, we went over some virtual fundraising methods and ideas. Live video events can be hosted through whichever platform you're most comfortable with: Zoom, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and so on. Platforms that have a screen sharing feature can allow for a mix of pre-recorded and live content. Some ways that you could raise funds through a virtual event include selling tickets online through a platform like Eventbrite or Canada Helps, requiring a donation be made to receive an invite link or password to the event, offering the event free of charge and soliciting for donations during the event, or hosting it as a Facebook page event with an access charge or a Zoom webinar with a registration fee. Of course, not all virtual fundraisers would require a live video component. Check out the manual for a comprehensive list of fundraising ideas that have been used by charities throughout the pandemic. Whichever type of fundraiser you choose, be sure to promote it heavily through email, social media, your website, and word of mouth. Good luck. Thank you so much for attending our webinar today. We really appreciate your time and your support. We hope that you will check out our pandemic planning manual when it becomes available.